My brother Daniel had always been the star of the family. From the moment we were kids, he was praised for every little thing he did, good grades, sports trophies, his confident personality. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the kid who loved computers, books, and solitude. To everyone else, that made me boring, unambitious, a failure. By the time we were adults, nothing had changed. At family gatherings, Daniel showed up in designer clothes, talking about his luxury car and vacations. I usually just sat there, listening to my relatives comparing us. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Mom once said, as if I hadn't heard it 1,000 times already. Daniel smirked every time. He loved being the golden child. What no one knew was that my so-called failure came with a secret. I had started a small tech business in college, something I never bragged about. I kept my head down, worked late nights, reinvested everything. Over time, it grew into something bigger than I could have imagined. By my late 20s, I had more money than I knew what to do with. Daniel, on the other hand, lived like a king without ever working hard. He always had a new watch, a new car, a new trip lined up. Everyone thought it was his brilliance. I knew the truth. Those luxuries weren't funded by his genius or hard work. They were funded by me. And the day he finally discovered that truth was the day everything between us changed forever. It all started the year Daniel hit a rough patch. At least, that's what he called it when he showed up at my apartment one night, claiming his business venture had gone under and his credit cards were maxed out. "You wouldn't understand, little brother," he said, sinking into my couch, like it belonged to him. "It's called taking risks. Something you've never had the guts to do." He said it while asking me for money. I should have told him to leave, should have reminded him of every time he'd called me useless. Instead, I transferred $2,000 to his account the same night. At first, it felt like a one-time favor. But one time became two, then three. Before long, I was paying his rent, just until he got back on his feet. The truth? He never got back on his feet. He discovered it was easier to let me carry him. My business was booming by then, and the money I gave him barely made a dent in my accounts. Still, I never told him how successful I really was. Part of me didn't want his approval anymore. But Daniel, he kept his role as the star. He'd roll up to family dinners in the car I'd practically bought for him, laugh about how he was making moves while looking at me with that smug grin. "You should really think about your future, man. Can't coast forever." Every word was a knife. He didn't just take my money, he took my dignity. And yet I stayed silent. Until the day he made one mistake that changed everything. The breaking point came at our parents' anniversary dinner. Daniel showed up late, as usual, sliding the keys of his shiny new BMW onto the table like it was an accessory. Everyone gasped and praised him. "Daniel, you're doing so well for yourself," Mom beamed, her pride glowing across the room. "Not bad for someone who barely finished college," our uncle added with a laugh. Daniel smirked, then turned his attention to me. "And what about you, little brother? Still working those dead-end jobs? Still struggling to find direction?" He chuckled, as if humiliating me was entertainment. I clenched my jaw, my fork digging into the plate. He had no idea that my money had paid for the down payment on that car. He had no idea that the luxury vacation he bragged about last summer was booked on the credit card I quietly covered when he forgot to pay it off. I caught Dad's eyes for a moment. Disappointment. The same look I'd seen my whole life. And I wanted to scream, to shout that Daniel was nothing without me. But instead, I just forced a smile and said nothing. After dinner, Daniel pulled me aside in the driveway. "Hey, I'm a little tight this month. You think you can spot me another couple grand? You know, until my next big deal comes through." His casual tone snapped something inside me. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel resentful. I felt ready to expose the truth. And fate handed me the perfect opportunity sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, our parents hosted a family barbecue. The house was full, cousins, uncles, aunts, even neighbors dropping by. Daniel, as always, made his grand entrance. He wore a designer shirt, carried an expensive watch on his wrist, and handed our mom a bouquet of roses with a flourish. "Only the best for my favorite lady," he said, kissing her cheek as she melted with pride. Everyone clapped, and Daniel basked in the spotlight. Then came the inevitable. He started talking about his business ventures. Something about networking, investments, a project in real estate. The usual empty talk. Nobody noticed that his wallet hadn't seen a real paycheck in years. I stood in the corner, quietly sipping my drink, until one of our cousins turned to me. "So, what do you do these days?" she asked politely. Before I could answer, Daniel cut in. "He's still figuring it out," he said with that same smug grin. "Not everyone's built to be successful, you know." The group laughed awkwardly, shifting their eyes to me. My chest burned. I looked at Daniel, who was clearly enjoying himself. And that's when I realized he thought I would never fight back. But that day, I decided I would. Because what Daniel didn't know was that I wasn't just paying his bills anymore. I was the silent investor in the very company he bragged about. The same business that made him look so important. The office lease, the equipment, the startup capital, all of it came from me. And he was about to find out in the most humiliating way possible. The chance came faster than I imagined. A week after that barbecue, Daniel invited the whole family to a business presentation at his new office downtown. He bragged that he'd finally landed a major investor and wanted everyone to see how far he'd come. I didn't tell anyone, but I already knew who that major investor was. Me. Months earlier, when Daniel begged for help starting his company, I quietly set up the funding through a shell account. I thought it would give him stability, maybe even force him to take responsibility. Instead, he used it as a stage to fuel his ego. When we arrived, Daniel gave a tour as if he'd built everything from scratch. The office had glass walls, sleek furniture, expensive computers, all paid for by my wire transfers. Our relatives clapped impressed, and my parents looked at him like he was the second coming of Steve Jobs. Finally, Daniel stood at the front of the conference room, pointing to a slideshow. "This is just the beginning," he announced proudly. "I've worked so hard to get here, and soon we'll be expanding internationally." The applause was thunderous. But then the manager of the building, Mr. Klein, walked in. He spotted me instantly and walked over with a smile. Mr. Taylor. Good to see you. Everything's running smoothly. If you'd like to review the accounts next week, just let me know." Every head in the room turned toward me. Daniel froze. I nodded calmly. "Thanks, Mr. Klein. I'll call you Monday." Daniel's face drained of color. He realized, in front of everyone, that he wasn't the star of this show. He was just the actor. I was the producer. And the curtain had finally lifted. The silence in the room was deafening. Our cousins exchanged confused glances. My parents frowned, and Daniel's smile twitched nervously as he tried to laugh it off. "Wait, what was that about?" Mom asked, her voice sharp. Mr. Klein looked puzzled. "Oh, I assumed you all knew. The lease for this office and the company funding are under Mr. Taylor's account." He gestured at me. "Your son here has been financing everything." Gasps echoed around the room. Daniel's eyes widened as if he'd just been stripped naked in front of the family. "That's not true," he stammered. "I built this myself." I finally stepped forward. My hands were steady, though my heart raced. "Really, Daniel? Then maybe you can explain how you managed to afford the lease when you were already drowning in debt." Whispers filled the room. Our aunt muttered something about always wondering how Daniel lived so lavishly. My father's face darkened, disappointment cutting through his pride. Daniel tried to recover. "Okay, maybe he helped me once or twice. But everything else?" "No," I interrupted firmly. "Not once or twice. Every paycheck that kept you afloat. Every car payment. Every trip. This office. Your so-called business. All of it, Daniel. Without me, you'd still be broke." For the first time in his life, my brother had no comeback. He just stood there, humiliated, while the truth finally sank in for everyone else. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a failure anymore. I felt free. The family gathering dissolved into chaos. My mother pressed her hands to her mouth, whispering Daniel's name as if she couldn't believe her golden boy had been living a lie. My father's silence was heavier than any words. He just stared at Daniel like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. Daniel, desperate, tried to turn the spotlight back on me. "So what? You think throwing money around makes you better than me?" he snapped. "You've always been jealous of my success." That actually made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. "Jealous? Daniel, I was the one keeping you afloat while you mocked me in front of everyone. Do you know how many times you called me a failure while wearing clothes I paid for?" His jaw tightened, but he had nothing to say. The truth had already sunk its claws into him. Then Mom finally spoke, her voice breaking. "Daniel, is it true? All of this?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then muttered, "I didn't ask him to do it." That was the moment everything shifted. The admiration, the favoritism, the pedestal he'd lived on his whole life, it all crumbled in an instant. Our relatives, once so eager to praise him, now looked at him with disappointment and disgust. And for the first time, their eyes turned to me. Not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect. After everyone left, the house was eerily quiet. Just me, Daniel, and our parents sitting in the living room. The tension was so thick, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Dad leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Is it true, Daniel? Your brother's been financing your life." Daniel's face was pale. He rubbed his temples like a man under interrogation. "It wasn't like that. I just needed help," he offered. I shook my head. "You didn't just need help, Daniel. You built your whole identity on money that wasn't yours. And the worst part, you made sure to humiliate me every chance you got." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "How could you do this to your own brother?" Daniel finally snapped. Because he was supposed to be nothing. He was the quiet one, the boring one, the one nobody cared about. And then he got lucky with some stupid business. I couldn't let him outshine me. His words hit the room like a bomb. My parents froze. I just stared at him, almost pitying him. "Outshine you?" I said softly. "Daniel, I never wanted to compete with you. I just wanted respect." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. For the first time, my brother couldn't hide behind his charm or his fake success. He was exposed. And I realized something important. He wasn't just jealous of me. He was terrified of me. The days that followed were strange. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives who once ignored me, now praising me for my hard work and asking about my business. It felt surreal, like the roles Daniel and I had played our entire lives had been flipped overnight. Daniel, on the other hand, went quiet. No more flashy posts on social media. No more smug remarks at family dinners. He barely showed his face anywhere. When he finally did call me, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't mean what I said. I was angry. "You know I appreciate what you did for me." I let him talk, but I didn't interrupt. He rambled about starting fresh, about working hard this time, about maybe partnering with me as equals. Finally, I cut him off. "Daniel, I don't hate you. But you need to understand, there's no partnership here. You burned that bridge. If you want a future, you'll have to build it yourself." There was a long silence on the line. Then, for once, he didn't argue. He just hung up. For the first time in years, I felt light. I wasn't carrying him anymore. I wasn't hiding in his shadow. I was finally standing in my own truth. But one last conversation with my parents would change everything for good. That Sunday, my parents invited me over for dinner. No big family gathering this time, just the three of us. The atmosphere was calmer than it had been in years. Mom served food in silence for a while before finally speaking. "We owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling, "for believing Daniel without ever questioning. For making you feel less when you were the one carrying more than any of us knew." Dad nodded slowly. "I should have seen it. You've always been responsible, but I let myself believe the noise instead of the truth. I'm proud of you, son." Hearing those words, after a lifetime of disappointment in their eyes, nearly broke me. Not because I needed validation anymore, but because it felt like closing a wound that had been open since childhood. I smiled faintly. I never wanted to replace Daniel. I just wanted respect for who I am. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You have it. More than that, you have our admiration." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the failure, the forgotten child, or the shadow of my brother. I felt like myself, and that was enough. As for Daniel, he still has a lot to prove. Maybe one day he'll learn the lesson. But whether he does or not, I've already won my freedom. Because the truth is, I was never the failure. I was the foundation.